Hey guys, it's Danny. Today, as promised, we're gonna talk all about Polychilos type Phalaenopsis. What they are, where they're coming from, how are they different than your typical Phalaenopsis from the flower shop, and to give you a little spoiler, Polychilos type Phalaenopsis are the types of phals that you will be able to rebloom if you cannot rebloom these guys. Did I get you intrigued? Well, it's true. So today I'm going to focus on the Polychilos subgenus and the actual Phalaenopsis subgenus. I'm going to compare the two because I think it will be actually easier to observe the differences and get a sense of their care. We're also going to look at the geographical locations in which these species are coming from, have a sort of a seminar type of a video, and hopefully if you've ever wondered about these guys, I will give you all the answers to the questions you've ever had. So if this sounds like something you'd like, don't forget to give this video a like, it really helps it out, and why not subscribe? I post multiple times a week, mainly orchid content, but also other types of plants. All right, first of all, before I even start the subject, if you're a total beginner, just purchased yourself a flower shop Phalaenopsis, and you're really confused right now, stop this video. This is a bit more of an intermediate type of a video. Just expand the description and there you will find tutorials on the flower shop Phalaenopsis, how to care for them, how to rebloom them, and so on and so forth. Since I will talk a lot about the care for these guys, and I will assume that most of you already know how to care for these guys. So if that's you, do start with the care for these guys first, and I'll just see you a little later. Right, so with that out of the way, let's just start from somewhere. I don't know how I'm gonna structure this video, because it's a lot of information I want to go through, but let's just start with what is a Polychilos type Phalaenopsis. Well, it's a subgenus of the genus Phalaenopsis. Not only they look and behave a little bit different, but also there is one key aspect of their care which is totally different, and this refers to blooming. While the typical Phalaenopsis orchid requires a little bit of a cool down in the winter time, these guys absolutely don't. These grow warm to hot all year round. They don't need you to drop the temperature. If you can't drop the temperature, consider these guys. So that's at a glance the major difference between them. But obviously there are multiple layers to that. Why do these guys require that little cool down and these guys don't? Well, it all has to do with the geographical location where the species are naturally growing. And for this, I shall need my laptop. Okay, so as I was saying, the geographical location in which the species are found will determine a different set of traits which will differ between the groups. And just so you know, Phalaenopsis and Polychilos are not the only two subgenera, there are others as well. I'll link it down below to an American Orchid Society article that speaks about the other subgenera, which are not all that common. We're not going to focus on them. But just so you know, the Phalaenopsis and Polychilos subgenera are the more, let's say, popular ones. Let's start with the Phalaenopsis subgenus. I have here a representative. This is my beautiful Phalaenopsis schilleriana, which is in the process of blooming right now. Isn't she adorable? Well, actually, the schilleriana is a very popular choice in hybridization. Many of the orchids in the flower shops do have a little bit of schilleriana somewhere in their genetics. And let's just take a look on the Orchid Species website. I will link you to down below. I'll link you to everything down below. It is described as an epiphytic orchid endemic to the Philippines. It grows at elevation of sea level to 450 meters. So we're not dealing with a high altitude orchid here. Now, if we're not acquainted with the beautiful islands of the Philippines, let's just Google it, right? Looking on the world map, we can see that the Philippines is located close to the equator, but not really on the equator. But it is a tropical region. It makes sense. These orchids are warm to hot growing. They cannot withstand freezing conditions. And if you already know my tutorials, you know I always say don't keep these guys anywhere lower than 15 degrees Celsius. I'll put the Fahrenheit equivalent on the screen. And this is because genetically, they're not programmed to withstand lower temperatures. Even if they might survive these temperatures, they will definitely have cold damage. Not what we want. Now, if we Google the lowest temperature that this orchid might encounter in its natural habitat, we see that an average revolves around 20 to 22 degrees Celsius. So from very high temperatures, we can actually go as low as 20 degrees Celsius. By all means, it's not very cold, but it is a decrease in temperature. Usually, in this time of the year, the Phalaenopsis subgenus produces flower spikes, hence why we need to provide that little bit of temperature drop. But wait, Danny, your temperature drop goes to 17 degrees Celsius, not 20 or 22. Yes, but the Schilleriana is not the only orchid used in hybridization. Another species which is the actual basis of miniature Phalaenopsis, and not only, is the Phalaenopsis equestris. And actually, you guys, without the beautiful equestris, we would not have mini Phalaenopsis. Again, if we check the orchid species website, we learn that the equestris is endemic to the Philippines and southern Taiwan even. And again, it is a hot to warm growing orchid. But if we look a little bit at the map of the globe, we see that Taiwan is further north than the Philippines. And as you know, the further up and down in relation to the equator you go, the lower the temperatures get. So for the equestris, temperatures can actually go a little bit lower than for the Schilleriana. So reblooming these two orchids might be slightly different in cultivation. And since flower shop Phalaenopsis are just so complex, it's hard to know what species exactly they have in their parentage. What I like to do is give you the lowest you can safely go to make sure that all of your Phalaenopsis hybrids bloom, even if they don't have the equestris in their parentage, or even if they do maybe in a smaller percentage, you definitely can rebloom Phalaenopsis with lowering temperature up to 20 degrees Celsius, but some will just not. And trust me when I tell you, some definitely won't. I've had so many Phalaenopsis along the years, some are just stubborn. And just a little tip for you guys, if you want to know the parentage of your orchid, no matter if it's Phalaenopsis or something else, what you need to do is get the name of that orchid and then type into Google the name followed by Blue Nanta. And there you can find the parentage of your orchid. So let's take Phalaenopsis Little Gem Stripes, let's Google it, find the Blue Nanta website, and look at that. The main parent of this orchid is actually the equestris. Who would have guessed? Now let's take a Polychilos type Phalaenopsis and do the same research. Let's think about the Phalaenopsis bellina, which is one of the most common Polychilos types. I don't have it in bloom right now, I have the next best thing. This is a Violaceae hybrid. Bellina and Violaceae come from the same regions. So the bellina is described as a hot growing epiphytic orchid endemic to Borneo. And again, let's find out more about the beautiful island of Borneo. And look at that. It is located smack on the equator. It is a little bit lower than the Philippines and quite a little bit lower than Taiwan. So temperatures in this region usually tend to stay a little bit warmer. And this little bit literally can be a margin of 5 degrees Celsius. And it is enough for this orchid in cultivation in normal home conditions not to require that little cool down. Bottom line, these things are a little bit relative. As you know, some years are a little bit cooler, some years are a little bit hotter, but when it comes to these orchids, a few degrees difference can actually make all the difference, especially when it comes to reblooming. So the slight differences in geographical location, but not only, in elevation, and the little quirks of the climate in those particular regions makes Phalaenopsis require a few different subgenera because they are slightly different in between them. In the American Orchid Society article that I shared with you, down below you will learn what species go into what subgenus, but pretty much the Schilleriana, Stuartiana, Aphrodite equestris, and a few others, they are placed under the Phalaenopsis subgenus, and Violaceae, bellina, Amboinensis, money, and other summer blooming species are all bunched together in the Polychilos. So now let's talk a little about visual differences, how these guys are different from the typical Phalaenopsis. When Phalaenopsis grow new leaves, they are typically much glossier than the older leaves. This is absolutely normal, but the Polychilos Phalaenopsis takes it to another level. P.S. I've been filming for an hour. In between Joey's noises and the outside noises, I'm gonna go mental soon. Alright, so the Polychilos, when it comes to their leaves, oh my goodness, they do take it to another level. Look how glossy the leaves are. Most Polychilos phals do have this beautiful glossiness on their leaves, which fades a little bit with age, yes, but not to the extent of the Phalaenopsis. And P.S. what you see on the screen is not the result of leaf shine or anything of the sorts. It's absolutely natural. I didn't put anything on these leaves. I just care for the orchids properly, and the rest is them. Root-wise, they are absolutely identical to the typical Phalaenopsis. They will grow a ton of roots and they will behave the same. When the roots are wet, they're typically green in appearance, and when they're dry, they're typically silvery. No difference there whatsoever. Flowering wise, there is a very big difference. There is a reason why the Phalaenopsis subgenus is mainly used in cultivation for hybridization, and you can find it in flower shops. And that's because it can create longer flower spikes with a lot of flowers. These genes are very appealing to humans. Don't we want a lot of blooms on very tall flower spikes, a beautiful cascade of flowers? Yes, we do. Well, the subgenus that does that is the Phalaenopsis subgenus, not the Polychilos. The Polychilos, in the vast majority of cases, creates much tinier flower spikes, and typically at one time only a few flowers are open. Definitely we will not have 30 flowers in bloom like the Schilleriana, which is a species. She's able to do that without human intervention. There are a few species in the Polychilos subgenus that are different, like the Gigantea. That one can create a whole lot of blooms on a flower spike, but it also grows as tall as me, which is not a good feature in home cultivation. And in the last few years, the trend is to go smaller rather than big, because when these orchids are not in bloom, they look like a lettuce and they take up half a table. What I have here is a mini phal, which I prefer. A standard phal is 10 times as big. Well, not really, but 5 times for sure. The Polychilos, having either smaller blooms, either fewer blooms per flower spike, has not been a very appealing candidate for hybridization. As we will see, some hybrids do have Polychilos in their parentage, but for whole different reasons. Because what these guys have that most flower shop Phalaenopsis don't is fragrance. And oh, what a beautiful fragrance. In my opinion, one of the queens of fragrances of the orchid world is the Phalaenopsis bellina, which has such a mouth-watering, fruity, and powerful fragrance, it's very hard to dislike. Violacea as well has a beautiful fragrance, which is a lot sweeter, a little bit more cinnamony. And even though the Schilleriana has a little bit of a fragrance, usually the trait has been lost because most other species don't have a fragrance. So we gained an abundance of flowers and we lost fragrance. I think it was a good deal in the long term, because if it wasn't for these Phalaenopsis orchids generally would not be so popular, right? But yeah, when it comes to flowering, these guys are not so showy, but I would say they have better looking blooms. I like the waxiness of the blooms, and also they have a fragrance most of the times, not all of them. Let's talk a little bit about care now, shall we? Well, there's not a whole lot to say because they actually take the exact same identical care as these guys, minus the cool down in winter. Now, I personally call these guys summer bloomers because for me in this environment, they bloom a little bit more in the summer than they do in the winter since it's warmer. But the reality is that they can bloom at any time of the year. If it's warm enough, they can bloom on and off throughout the year. And actually, Orchid Web doesn't call them summer bloomers. This is something that I call them. I don't know if I heard it anywhere else, but they actually call them summer stars, which might be another name that might take off depending on your location, so I'm gonna include both. But as the name says, in more temperate climates, they will much better bloom in summer because it's warmer than in winter. Obviously, if you live in a constantly warm environment, these guys will bloom at any time of the year for you. You can actually have them bloom on and off all of the time. How wonderful is that? Whereas these guys sometimes just refuse to bloom if you don't give them that little bit of a cool down. They will just grow beautifully, vegetatively, but not give you blooms. And throughout the years, I did have a lot of comments from people in very warm regions saying they do have issues with reblooming these guys. Some of you don't really have a lot of issues, but many of you do. Hence why, if you live in a very hot country, do go for the Polychilos types or hybrids, which I'm gonna get to, rather than these typical flower shop ones. Other than that, care is the same. They're absolutely tolerant of drought. They don't require a whole lot of light. Actually, they do pretty well in bright shade. I personally keep them in artificial light, and they bloom and they grow like crazy. If you live in a pretty cool, let's say, area, or you have a very cool winter that affects your grow room, do consider IKEA cabinets or cabinets that you can keep a little bit warmer. I will link it down below to my IKEA cabinet. Basically, because I have grow lights inside, the temperature is typically warmer than my greenhouse. And in this way, I can actually have some blooms in the winter as well. Typically in my region, winter is not a very rich season for reblooming Polychilos, but in these cabinets, I actually do pretty okay. Now, when it comes to the flower spike, here we have a little difference as well. Many of these guys actually are sequential bloomers and they hang on to their flower spikes for years upon years upon years. I suggest that if your orchid is not sick in any way, it's very healthy, I suggest you don't cut these flower spikes because they will continue to rebloom. You're gonna have a whole bunch of them at some point, and don't worry that the orchid will get exhausted because you see, it's not producing a whole lot of flowers. I have 2 buds here, a flower here, one here, and another flower spike here. At some point, if the flower spike decides to go dry, it will, that's okay, but it's not draining itself for the flowers. I mean, just compare it to this one, you know. No need to cut these flower spikes. These orchids can definitely grow leaves and roots with the flower spikes still on. Now let's talk a little bit about hybrids and cross-hybridization between the Phalaenopsis subgenus and the Polychilos. Is it possible? Absolutely. What are we gonna get? Who knows? It can be quite a gamble here. And I have a few hybrids that are actually okay. My favorite is the Sogo grape. If you look on the Blue Nanta website, you're gonna see we have a whole lot of parents for this orchid. Some of them Polychilos, some of them Phalaenopsis. What will this orchid be? Well, some people call them novelty hybrids. I'm not entirely sure if it's still used as a term and how correct it is, but yeah, typically these hybrids are called novelties because, again, they don't really look like the flower shop Phalaenopsis, but they don't really behave like the Polychilos either. For example, this one, you can see it has beautiful waxy flowers. They're fragrant, they smell really nice. You can see it produces pretty long flower spikes and quite a lot of flowers per flower spike. Plus, the coloration, the thickness, and the fragrance, that's a win. But when it comes to care, this one is a little bit different in the sense that it can bloom throughout the summer as well as in winter. I find that I do get more blooms in winter than I get in the summertime, and maybe that is a trait of the Phalaenopsis subgenus in its parentage. This one behaves a little bit different depending on the year, to be fully honest. This year has been really cold for us. It actually snowed in my city. Oh my goodness, it never snows here. Well, it does, but like once every 10 years. This is full of flowers. It absolutely enjoyed the cool down. And in summertime, it will continue to put out some flowers as well, but the flower spikes don't last as long as the typical Phalaenopsis. So what I actually do is remove all of them once a year, just like the subgenus Phalaenopsis. Another good hybrid with a weird behavior, in my opinion, is the Leodoro, which again looks more like a typical Phalaenopsis but smells like a Bellina. It's wonderful, but it's really in between worlds. It will not really behave like a typical flower shop Phalaenopsis, but not like a Polychilos either. Bottom line though, the hybrids are wonderful, but I'll be honest, I'm personally a little bit torn because I don't like this long flower spike. Imagine a much shorter and more compact flower spike with these beautiful flowers. I think that will look a little bit better. It's up to you though, just so you know. Hybrids are absolutely possible. I would say that with these hybrids that have very, very heavy Polychilos influence, you're not gonna need to cool them down all that much. Maybe they will require like a 22 degrees Celsius, 20 degrees Celsius, something like that, in order to initiate the flower spike, but definitely not like the Equestris, which sometimes requires 17 degrees Celsius. So if you like them, definitely look into the hybrids. They might actually be easier to rebloom. But when it comes to the basic care, it is absolutely identical. Now, if you have hybrids that look more like the flower shop types, they have those thin flowers, very fluffy flowers, but you see that they have a little bit of Polychilos in their parentage as well. In my experience, those types are not very heavily influenced by the Polychilos in the parentage, so treat it like a normal, typical flower shop Phalaenopsis. Give it that winter cool down because most likely it will require a little cool down. I don't think it's gonna behave like a Polychilos. If it doesn't look like one, most probably it's not gonna behave like one. And when it comes to primary or simple hybrids, only in the Polychilos family there, then they all pretty much should require the same type of care, which means no cool down. It's only when we mix the two we get anomalies, pretty much. But it's fun at the end of the day to discover them. So I hope this video gave you an idea of maybe what to look for, maybe what to stay away if you really cannot rebloom your typical phals due to the heat. Then just go with pure Polychilos or pure Polychilos hybrids. Don't really attempt much of a combination between the two. I would go as far as to guarantee you're gonna have blooms. If you have the care down, the Polychilos will bloom for you, even if it's 30 degrees Celsius all the time. I think you're gonna have a great time. Look for the Violacea and Bellina, maybe more Bellina, because it smells so nice. If you don't know how to find nurseries, I'll just link you to my video down below. Basically, you Google them, but I have a video in which I do talk a little bit about a list that my viewers made with some nurseries from other territories. Check that one out. Don't forget, Google is your friend, pretty much. So with that said, thank you so much for watching. If you want to follow me on social media, search for me. I'm at MissOrchidGirl, but most importantly, subscribe to this channel because I post on a very regular basis and you don't want to miss my uploads, I think. Okay, I'll see you next time. Bye!